I'm 25 years old and I grew up thinking that I just wasn't good enough. Not in a self-pitying, dramatic way, but in a very real, tangible way, because my grandparents made sure I knew it. Or at least, that's what I thought. I have an older cousin, Nathan. He's 27, and we were practically raised together. Our families lived close, we went to the same schools, and our grandparents, our dad's parents, were a major presence in both our lives. The only difference was that they adored Nathan. Me, I was there, I guess. It was never outright cruel, not in a way I could point to and say, see, look at this. But it was there in the little things. When we were kids, Nathan would get the newest gaming console for Christmas while I got a book about the value of hard work or a calendar with motivational quotes. On birthdays, he'd get a big celebration with all of our extended family, while mine was just a quiet dinner with immediate family. I never complained. How could I? It's not like I was being mistreated. I just wasn't celebrated. Not like Nathan. The comparisons were constant. Nathan was so talented in art while I was a hard worker. If he showed them a sketch, they'd gush over how he was going to be the next great artist. If I brought home an A+ in math, they'd nod and say, "That's nice, keep it up," before changing the subject. I learned early on that there was no winning. Nathan was naturally gifted, and I was just trying to keep up. The older we got, the more obvious it became. When I got into engineering school and graduated with honors, they didn't even come to my graduation. The excuse was something vague, too busy, couldn't make the trip. Whatever, but when Nathan had an art showcase in another city, they drove hours to be there. Front row, all smiles. Still, I never brought it up. What would be the point? I just kept my head down, did my own thing, and built my own life outside of all that. I figured one day I'd just stop caring. Then, out of nowhere, they invited me to dinner. That was unusual. I saw them at family events, sure, but they had never invited me anywhere one-on-one. My first thought was that it had to do with Nathan, maybe another celebration for him, or maybe he had something going on and they wanted to talk about it. But no, they specifically wanted me to come over, alone, so I went, not really sure what to expect. They greeted me warmly, acting like we had the kind of relationship where this was normal. We sat down, started eating, and I was waiting for the real reason I was there. Then they dropped it on me. Apparently, all of it, every moment of favoritism, every time they brushed me aside, had been intentional. They framed it as an experiment, claiming they wanted to see how Nathan and I would develop under different circumstances, completely ignoring the emotional damage they caused. According to them, they wanted to see if I could rise above, without favoritism, to test if I could still be successful without being showered with praise. Meanwhile, they purposely spoiled Nathan to see if he would stay ambitious, or if the constant praise would make him lazy. I just stared at them, trying to wrap my head around it. They were saying this like it was a perfectly reasonable thing to do, like it was some kind of character-building exercise. And worse, they said I had failed. Apparently, because I had distanced myself over the years, instead of continuing to seek their approval, I had shown weakness. I should have kept pushing, kept proving myself, kept trying to earn their love. Meanwhile, Nathan, who had no idea this was even happening, had passed because despite being spoiled, he had still worked hard in his own way. I didn't even know what to say. My entire childhood, my teenage years, every moment where I had questioned why I wasn't good enough, it had all been some twisted game to them. A test. Nathan was just as blindsided as I was. He had thought the favoritism was real. He had never known there was a praying. And now, sitting at that dinner table, we were both realizing at the same time that our entire dynamic, our entire understanding of our family, had been built on a lie. My parents, especially my mom, were furious when I told them. My mom was livid, demanding to know what kind of people would do something like that to their own grandson. My dad was quiet, but I could tell he was just as upset in his own way. The grandparents, though, they didn't see the problem. They genuinely believed they had done something wise, something meaningful. They expected me to be grateful for the lesson. I wasn't. I walked out. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just got up, left, and drove home. That night, I lay in bed and replayed my entire life in my head, questioning how much of it was even real. I told some close friends about it, and every single one of them was horrified. They said what I already knew deep down: this wasn't normal. It wasn't okay. It was manipulation, plain and simple. And now, I don't know where I go from here. But one thing is for sure, I can't unhear what they told me. I can't pretend it didn't happen, and I can't go back to believing they ever actually loved me. I ignored their messages, calls, texts, even a voicemail from my grandmother using a different number. I didn't respond to any of them. I needed space. The last thing I wanted was to hear more justifications, more twisted logic about how their manipulation was somehow for my own good. Nathan was the first person I actually talked to after that dinner. He messaged me late that night, and instead of the usual casual tone we had, he got straight to the point. He was just as shaken as I was. He admitted he had always believed he was the favorite, but hearing the truth made him realize he had been just as much of a pawn in their game as I had. He told me something that caught me off guard. He used to think I was the lucky one. In his mind, I had always seemed so free, able to just live my life without the constant pressure of meeting their expectations. He had spent years feeling like he had to prove he deserved their praise, terrified that if he ever failed, they would take their affection away. It was only now, knowing what had really happened, that he realized how messed up it all was. Our parents didn't take the news well. My mother in particular was furious. I had never seen her this angry before. She said she didn't care how old they were, or what their intentions had been. What they did was cruel, plain and simple. She told my father that she was done playing nice, and if they couldn't understand why this was a problem, then she didn't want anything to do with them. My father, on the other hand, barely said a word. He just sat there, listening, rubbing his temples like he was trying to process it all. He didn't defend them, but he didn't say much against them either. That worried me. I thought maybe my grandparents would realize they had crossed a line, but instead they doubled down. A few days later, I got an email from them. It was long, almost rambling, filled with self-righteous explanations about how they had only done what they thought was best for me. They accused me of being ungrateful and immature, for not understanding the bigger picture. My grandmother even wrote that she was disappointed in me for walking away instead of showing the resilience they had hoped to instill in me. I closed the email halfway through. I didn't need to read more. My parents decided to go low contact after that. My mother was done with them, and while my father still hadn't fully cut ties, he stopped responding to their messages as often. It wasn't a full break, but it was enough of a shift that even extended family started noticing. That's when the real divide started. Some relatives reached out to me, telling me they were horrified by what had happened. They said they had no idea my grandparents had been playing favorites on purpose, and that they were so sorry I had to go through that. Others, though, they rushed to my grandparents' defense. They only wanted what was best for you. You're overreacting. They were trying to teach you something important. The worst of it came from my Aunt Nathan's mom. She told him and me that parents do what they think is best, and we had no right to judge them for it. Nathan took that harder than I did. He was still struggling to figure out what all of this meant for him, and hearing his own mother side with them made him feel like he had no one in his corner. One of my friends suggested therapy. I had never really considered it before, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much this had affected me. My whole childhood had been built around this idea that no matter how hard I tried, I just wasn't good enough. Even now, as an adult with a good job and a life of my own, a part of me still believed that. I wasn't sure if I was ready to go, but I knew I needed to do something. Meanwhile, my work was starting to suffer. I wasn't focusing as well as I usually did. Deadlines I would normally hit easily were suddenly slipping past me. It wasn't that I didn't care. I just felt like my brain was constantly somewhere else. Even when I wasn't actively thinking about what had happened, it was still there, lurking in the background. At one point, I even sat down to write them a letter. Not for them really, more for myself. I wanted to explain, in my own words, why I couldn't just forgive them and move on. Why this wasn't something I could just brush off as a mistake. I never sent it. I didn't see the point. Then out of nowhere, I got another voicemail from my grandmother. She must have used a different number, or borrowed someone else's phone to bypass the block. She sounded calm, almost gentle. She said they missed me and wanted to make things right. I deleted it without listening to the rest. I booked the therapy session. I wasn't sure what I expected, but the moment I started explaining everything, the favoritism, the experiment, the way they had twisted my entire childhood, the therapist didn't even hesitate. She called it manipulation, point blank. Hearing that from a professional somehow made it feel more real. She told me that what they did wasn't normal, that love isn't something that should have to be earned through tests and mind games. I had spent years wondering if I was just overreacting, if maybe I was reading too much into things. But no, it was real, and it was messed up. I left the session feeling like I had finally taken the first step in getting rid of the weight I'd been carrying for so long. But of course, my grandparents weren't about to make it easy. That night, I finally caved and listened to the voicemail my grandmother had left. I almost regretted it immediately. Her voice was calm, almost soft, like she was speaking to a child. She told me they missed me, that they wanted to fix things and talk this through. Then, right before she hung up, she added, "You'll regret pushing us away when we're gone." I stared at my phone. The words echoed in my head. That wasn't an apology. That wasn't even close. That was a threat, wrapped up in guilt, designed to make me second-guess myself. I didn't respond. Nathan reached out the next day. He had confronted them, trying to get answers. He wanted to understand why they did what they did, why they thought it was okay. He got nothing but dismissive responses. They told him he was being dramatic, that he should be grateful for the life lessons they gave him. When he pushed harder, they shut him down completely. He told me he was done. He didn't know if he was ready to cut them off entirely, but he wasn't going to keep trying anymore. I talked it over with my parents. My mother was already on board with cutting ties, and even my father, who had been so quiet through all of this, finally admitted he didn't see the point in keeping the relationship going if they weren't even willing to acknowledge they had done something wrong. That's when I decided I needed space from them, maybe permanently. I pulled up the letter I had written, the one I never sent, and made a few changes. Then, I sent it. I didn't expect a heartfelt response or even an acknowledgement. I just needed to say it to make it clear where I stood. I told them I wouldn't be speaking to them anymore unless they could offer a sincere apology, not one of their long-winded explanations, not some attempt to make me see their perspective, but a real acknowledgement of the damage they caused. Until then, I wanted nothing to do with them. It didn't take long for the backlash to start. An uncle called me, one I rarely spoke to. The conversation didn't last long. He told me I was being overdramatic, that I should respect my elders and let the past go. I blocked his number before he could finish his lecture. Then, the Facebook posts started. My grandparents, who barely ever used social media, began posting vague guilt-tripping messages about how some grandchildren forget the people who raised them, and one day they'll realize what they lost. They didn't name names, but it was obvious who they were talking about. I didn't engage. I refused to give them the reaction they were looking for. Nathan messaged me later, apologizing. He admitted that when we were younger, he had enjoyed being the favorite. He never really questioned it, never stopped to think about what it must have felt like for me. But now that he knew the truth, he felt sick about it. He told me he wished he had stood up for me more, that he had seen it sooner. I didn't blame him. It wasn't his fault. He had been just as manipulated as I was. A few weeks later, something happened that had nothing to do with them for once. I got a promotion at work. A big one. The kind that I had been working toward for years, and for the first time, I felt like I had proof that I didn't need their approval. I had built my own life, my own success, without their praise or validation. It was right around that time that they made their next move. They went to my parents. My grandmother called my mother, trying to guilt her into making me change my mind. My mother didn't even hesitate. She told them, "You played your game, and you lost him." Then she hung up. Nathan sent them a final message too, short and direct. "You failed your own test, because you lost both of us." They didn't respond. For the first time in my life, I think they finally understood that they had no control over us anymore. After I sent the letter, making it clear I wouldn't be engaging unless there was a real apology, my grandparents went silent. No calls, no messages, nothing. For a moment, I thought they were actually processing what had happened, maybe even realizing what they had lost. That hope didn't last long. A few days later, I got a message from an aunt. She sent me a screenshot of a group chat between some of the older family members. My grandparents were in there, calling me dramatic, and saying I was too weak to handle a simple life lesson. They claimed I had twisted the story to make them look bad, and that I was being influenced by modern attitudes about respect. And of course, there was the Facebook post. They wrote about how kids these days don't understand respect or gratitude, and how some people throw away family over nothing. It was vague, but everyone knew what they were talking about. I showed the messages to Nathan. He was furious. Up until that point, he had still been holding on to some hope that they would come around, that maybe they would realize what they had done. But this was proof that they didn't see anything wrong with what they had done to us. My mother saw the post and the messages, and she had enough. She called them directly. She demanded to know why they were spreading lies, instead of taking responsibility. Instead of admitting anything, they just doubled down. They said I was misinterpreting everything and overreacting by cutting them off. Then came the worst part. They tried to rewrite history. They insisted they had never treated me unfairly. They said I had simply always been a different kind of person than Nathan, and that's why it seemed like there was favoritism. They talked about how I had always been distant, and had never tried hard enough to connect with them. Nathan wasn't letting that slide. He decided he needed closure, so he went to see them in person, one last time. It didn't go well. They told him I should have just laughed it off instead of making a big deal out of it. They acted like their so-called experiment was nothing more than a joke that I had taken too seriously. That was all Nathan needed to hear. He told them he was done, and he left. I ignored their calls after that. I knew nothing good would come from another conversation. But then my grandfather left a voicemail. His tone was completely different, angry, almost offended. He said I was throwing away years of love over one misunderstanding. That was it. I blocked them. Nathan did the same. Of course, they didn't stop. The cryptic social media posts kept coming. More passive-aggressive lines about how families should stick together, and how some people don't appreciate what they have until it's too late. I didn't engage. Neither did Nathan. Even though I knew I had made the right choice, the guilt lingered. Cutting off people I had once loved wasn't easy. But at the end of the day, love shouldn't come with conditions, and I wasn't going to spend my life chasing after something that was never real to begin with. My parents attended a family gathering without me. I had already made it clear I wanted nothing to do with my grandparents, so I skipped it. From what I heard later, that was the right choice. The moment my name came up, my grandparents wasted no time trashing me in front of everyone. They went on about how I was an ungrateful grandson, how I had turned my back on family over something so small, but then they took it even further. They told everyone I had brainwashed Nathan. According to them, he had been a good, loyal grandson until I got into his head and turned him against them. They painted me as manipulative, toxic, someone who wanted to tear the family apart. That was the last straw for my mother. She wasn't planning to cause a scene, but after hearing all of that, she snapped. In front of the entire family, she called them out for everything they had done. She made it clear that their experiment had backfired, that their actions, not mine, had led to this fallout. She told them they only had themselves to blame. It didn't matter. They refused to take any accountability. They played the same old song, that I was being dramatic, that they were just teaching lessons, that they had done nothing wrong. I thought that was the worst of it. I was wrong. A few days later, I got pulled into a private meeting at work. My boss sat me down and showed me an email they had received. It was anonymous, but the language was careful, calculated. The message claimed I had anger issues, that I was unstable and should not be trusted with leadership roles. The moment I read it, I knew exactly who sent it. My grandparents had crossed a line I didn't even think they were capable of crossing. It wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. They were actively trying to sabotage my career. I told Nathan. He was livid. He wanted to confront them in person, but I convinced him not to. At this point, there was nothing left to say. Thankfully, my boss wasn't an idiot. They saw the email for what it was. Nonsense. They assured me I had nothing to worry about, but the fact that it even happened made my blood boil. My father called my grandparents directly after that. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just told them, in no uncertain terms, that if they interfered with my job again, legal action would follow. That should have been enough to make them back off. Instead, they went even further. They started telling extended family members that I was dangerous, that they were afraid of me, that I was unstable and turning violent. Soon, I started getting texts from distant relatives asking if I was okay. Some of them were obviously just fishing for drama. Others sounded genuinely concerned. Either way, my grandparents' story was spreading. Nathan had enough. He made a public statement in the family group chat, making it official. He was going no contact. No more second chances. No more excuses. They were done. That still wasn't the end of it. A week later, they showed up at my workplace. Security had to escort them out. They were demanding to see me, making a scene at the front desk. I wasn't even in the building at the time, but I got a call from my manager letting me know what had happened. That was it. I consulted a lawyer. I was advised to send a cease and desist letter first, making it clear that if they continued to harass me or interfere in my life, legal consequences would follow. The letter was delivered. They didn't respond. For the first time in weeks, there was silence. No messages, no calls, no cryptic Facebook posts, just nothing. I don't know if this is truly over or if they're just waiting to try again, but at this point, I don't care. If they come back, I'll be ready. A cousin reached out with news. My grandparents had rewritten their will. Apparently, they had removed both Nathan and me entirely. Not just cut us down, but completely erased us. According to them, we were now strangers to the family, and they wouldn't be leaving a single thing to us. An ironic move considering they had spent years trying to control us financially. I had to laugh. I never expected or wanted anything from them in the first place, and I knew Nathan felt the same. If this was meant to be some kind of final punishment, it completely missed the mark. That didn't stop some of the family from trying to stir up more drama. The group chat blew up again, this time with relatives insisting Nathan and I were being unreasonable. They kept saying we should have just apologized to keep the peace, that it wasn't that serious, and that we had disrespected our elders beyond repair. Nathan was done playing nice. He posted screenshots of the email my job received, the messages where they called me weak, and the proof that they had shown up at my workplace. The chat went silent after that. Nobody had anything to say, but my grandparents weren't finished. They tried a different angle, going through my father. They called him privately, offering to reconsider adding me back into the will if I apologized. It wasn't about money, of course. It was about power, about making me grovel. My father shut them down immediately. He told them that if they thought they could buy their way out of this, they had completely lost touch with reality. Then came the email. It was framed as an apology, but it wasn't even close. They were sorry for any misunderstanding but refused to acknowledge what they had actually done. No mention of the years of manipulation, the blatant favoritism, the attempt to sabotage my job. Just a vague, condescending message about how families should stick together. I didn't respond. That led to their final move. A dramatic ultimatum. They sent one last message, this time saying I had until the end of the year to make things right, or I would be dead to them forever. Nathan didn't let that one slide. He went online and publicly tore into them, sarcastically thanking them for showing their true colors. He called them out for being prideful, manipulative, and incapable of real love. Once again, the family was divided, but at this point neither of us cared. One cousin, though, reached out privately. They told me something interesting. The grandparents did regret what they had done, but they were too stubborn, too prideful to admit it. Instead of apologizing, they doubled down, hoping that if they stood firm long enough, we would give in first. That wasn't happening. Holidays became tense. Family gatherings felt like a battlefield, with relatives picking sides. Some people ignored the topic altogether, while others made it clear where their loyalties were. Then news spread that my grandfather's health was declining. My parents mentioned it to me, clearly expecting me to react, but I refused to let guilt manipulate me. I wasn't heartless. I had good memories with him before all of this, but I also knew that if I caved now, it would set a precedent. They would never truly apologize. They would just use their circumstances as another tool to pull me back in. That was confirmed when my grandmother reached out one last time. "Life is too short," was all she said. I sent my final message. Life is too short to waste it on toxic people. Then, I permanently blocked their email. For the first time in years, I felt free. They had lost the power they held over me, and there was nothing they could do to take it back. The story wasn't over, but I had finally reclaimed control over my life. a cousin reached out again with new information. The grandparents were still talking about me, just not in a way that suggested they wanted to make amends. They were telling family members that I was a lost cause, but they still had hope for Nathan. Nathan wasn't amused. He had already made it clear where he stood, but seeing that they were still trying to pull him back in like this was the final straw. He sent them one last message, short and direct. He told them they had no more chances, that he was done for good, and that he wanted nothing to do with them ever again. Then he blocked them. Not long after that, my parents received a handwritten letter from them. It wasn't an apology, it was more of the same. They called Nathan and me ungrateful and begged my parents to talk some sense into us. It was desperate, but not in the way that suggested they actually regretted anything. It was just another attempt to control the situation. Then my cousin dropped a bombshell. The grandparents were struggling financially. It became clear they had long assumed Nathan and I would support them, yet they had made no effort to secure their own future, banking entirely on the idea that family would bail them out. That was the real reason behind everything. The favoritism, the manipulation, all of it. They had always assumed that since Nathan was the golden child, he would grow up to be financially successful and take care of them. And when that started to look uncertain, they had tried to pull me back in. It had never been about building character. It had never been about teaching life lessons. It was about money. Nathan started digging into things, and what he found made everything even worse. The college fund our grandparents had promised him, the one they had always used as proof of how much they had invested in him, it was gone. Emptied out years ago to cover their personal expenses. Nathan was furious. He called them directly, demanding an explanation. They tried to brush it off, saying unexpected costs had come up, and that they had meant to pay him back eventually, but there was no money left. That was the breaking point for Nathan's parents. His mother, who had spent so much time defending them, trying to make excuses for their behavior, was devastated. She cut contact immediately. No more justifications, no more trying to see their side. The grandparents must have realized they were losing control, because a few days later, they showed up at my parents' house, unannounced. My father met them at the door, and didn't let them in. They demanded to talk, but he refused. He told them to leave, and when they wouldn't, he made it clear that if they ever showed up again, legal action would follow. They left, but they didn't give up. Not long after, they sent one last message. They were willing to move forward, they said, as long as we didn't bring up the past. Nathan and I ignored them. We knew exactly what that meant. It wasn't an apology, it was a demand for silence. They didn't want to make things right. They just wanted us to pretend none of it had happened so they could regain some control. Some family members took their side. Of course, the usual ones. We were accused of being heartless, of abandoning family when they needed us most. It didn't matter how many times we explained the truth. People saw what they wanted to see. Nathan for once didn't bother arguing. He just sent a final message to the group chat. They gambled with their family's trust, and they lost. That was the last word on it. My father made one final warning. If they ever showed up at our door again, it wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a legal matter. And then silence. No more messages. No more cryptic Facebook posts. No more attempts to get us back under their control. For the first time, it felt like they were finally out of our lives. Maybe this was truly the end. A call came in from a lawyer's office. It was for my father. The lawyer claimed to be representing my grandparents and requested a meeting to discuss family matters. My father didn't agree to anything right away. Instead, he asked for specifics. That's when the lawyer revealed what the call was really about. They were demanding financial support. According to the lawyer, Nathan and I had a moral obligation to help our grandparents since they had invested in us throughout our childhood. The way it was worded, they made it sound like we owed them for raising us, like we were some kind of long-term investment that was supposed to pay off now that they were struggling. Nathan wasn't about to let that slide. Still furious over the missing trust fund, he called the lawyer's office himself. He didn't waste time being polite. He made it clear they would be getting nothing from either of us. My parents decided to make things even clearer. They publicly stated to the rest of the family that my grandparents would not be receiving a single cent from anyone in our household. If they had mismanaged their finances, that was on them. That must have hit them hard, because shortly after, the social media meltdown began. They posted a long dramatic rant about being abandoned in their time of need. They talked about how they had always been there for their family, how they had sacrificed so much only to be forgotten when they needed help the most. But for the first time, they didn't get the reaction they were expecting. Instead of sympathy, people started asking questions. Why would both grandsons cut them off so suddenly? Why would Nathan, the supposed golden child, turn his back on them completely? Some of the relatives who had blindly defended them before were now hesitating, realizing there was more to the story. Then came the next move. The fake health scare. A cousin reached out, saying that the grandparents were now claiming my grandfather was seriously ill, and that he wanted to make amends before it was too late. I didn't respond. Nathan didn't either. We knew exactly what this was. Just another attempt to manipulate us. If he was truly sick, they could have reached out before the money demands, before the lawyer, before the guilt-tripping Facebook posts. They only started playing this card when everything else had failed. Then another letter arrived. It was from my grandmother.
Handwritten.
It was a mess of emotions, part guilt trip, part blame, part reminiscing about the good old days. She wrote about how she had always loved me, how she had only wanted the best for me, but then in the same breath she called me ungrateful for turning my back on them. But the last line was the worst part. One day you will realize how much you needed us, and we will not be there. I set the letter down. Nathan got one too. He didn't even open it. He just threw it in the trash, saying he was done for good. The same relatives who had defended them before started reaching out again. Some tried to guilt us. Others wanted to hear our side of things now that the grandparents' stories weren't adding up. We didn't engage. By this point, their reputation had crumbled. People saw what they were: manipulative, selfish, unwilling to take accountability. That's when my parents decided to take the final step. Their lawyer sent a formal cease and desist letter, warning my grandparents that if they continued contacting us in any way, through lawyers, family members, or social media, there would be legal consequences. And then finally, there was silence. No more messages. No more letters. No more desperate attempts to regain control. For the first time, I felt something strange: relief. Because for the first time in my life, I genuinely didn't care about their opinion anymore. A distant cousin reached out with unexpected news. My grandparents had been evicted. It turned out their financial problems had been worse than anyone realized. Years of mismanagement, debt, and expecting their family to bail them out had finally caught up to them. They had lost their home. No one stepped in to help. They had spent decades playing favorites, manipulating, and burning bridges. Even the family members who once defended them wanted nothing to do with their problems now. Their most vocal supporters, the ones who had called Nathan and me ungrateful for cutting ties, suddenly went silent. Then they made their last desperate move. They reached out to my parents, not even for money, just for a place to stay. They had nowhere else to go. My mother, who had spent years trying to be neutral, finally put her foot down. She told them this was the result of their own choices. They had spent years testing loyalty, controlling people, pushing family away, and now, when they needed someone, there was no one left. Nathan and I heard about it later. Nathan barely reacted. He just said, they played their little game, and they lost. With no options left, they were forced to move into a small government-assisted apartment. The life they had built around status and control had crumbled. The Facebook manipulation stopped. No more cryptic guilt-tripping posts. No more dramatic complaints about disrespectful grandchildren. They had lost their audience. Nathan and I finally had a real conversation about everything. Not just about them, but about the damage they had done. For years, both of us had carried the weight of their expectations, the comparisons, the emotional games, the constant feeling of never being enough. It had shaped how we saw ourselves, how we navigated success in relationships. Therapy helped. I kept going, working through it all. I had spent so much time believing I needed to prove myself, when in reality, I had never needed their validation to begin with. Nathan thrived. He landed a major promotion, something he had been working toward for years. He finally felt free now that he had cut out the toxic influences that once made him doubt himself. My parents and I became closer. Without my grandparents constantly driving wedges between us, there was no more tension. We could just exist as a family. Then, for the first time in years, we had a peaceful family gathering. No drama, no manipulation, no forced apologies, just people who genuinely wanted to be there. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sorry for them. They had spent years trying to test my character. But in the end, they tested their own, and they failed.